we can get started. So basically, what are we trying to look at? We're trying to look at techniques that we use for risk assessment, because either we like it or not, for any management system to really help us to achieve our business goals and objectives, we need to make sure we address the risk and opportunities therein. And of course, most of the times when there's a failure around, for example, if we are looking at information security management system, if there's a failure around properly articulating the risk issues and opportunities, there will definitely be no solution that you can profile, because you want to look at the weakness, if I have to use that word, and the strength in the system. So an assessment is very key. So that being said, you also need to make sure you look at for the appropriate techniques, and that's what we're going to be looking at according to 31010 2019 version. So it's basically around how to select and apply various techniques that we can use to, first of all, understand the risk and opportunities and improve the way these uncertainties and opportunities is taken into action. And of course, my bio, like she rightly mentioned, I have a bachelor's degree in computer science, MBA International Business, okay, and executive MBA in information systems from Metropolitan London School of Business, also University of London European Energy Center, where I studied using renewable solution, solar energy, solar power photovoltaic course. I'm a PCB certified systems auditor. Around the certifications you've seen, I also train, and I'm also into data protection using the General Data Protection Regulation, Education Management System, Senior Lead Project Manager according to ISO standard, and of course, the Senior Lead Risk Manager. Because my address is based in Nigeria, but a citizen of the world. That's what I used to call myself, because we need to work equally, because that's what ISO is all about. So reference documents, we'll be looking at 31,000, the guidelines and principles of risk management largely. And of course, we'll be working more around the 31,010, the risk assessment techniques, okay? All right, so let's look at the agenda, what we have today. What exactly is risk assessment technique? I mean, in short form, I call it RAT. The boundary around it, how do we use it? The scope area, how do we apply it? Then how do we adopt? Adoption is always a concern. In most enterprises, both public and private, that have been opportune to be on a professional engagement, we've had these concerns around adoption. Where exactly do we apply 31,010? And what are the practical benefits that, of course, an organization, an individual can gain in order to be able to develop expertise to do the same? How do we implement it is another area we'll be looking at. And the application, applying the risk assessment techniques, selecting the risk assessment technique likewise. So application and selecting, there are two different things. Then the factors we need to consider when selecting a risk assessment technique, and of course, the various characteristics in look at when you're selecting, and most importantly, the applicability, because that's another area we need to be reliably informed on what we need to do. And of course, that would end afterwards to end the webinar. The boundary for the risk assessment techniques with 31,000, it provides us with what? Guidance on the selection and application. Very, very key. Selection and application. Appropriate techniques to use, selection and application to guide us. That's what 31,010 will do for assessing risk in range of situations, not just in one situation, but range of situations. And of course, it also assists us in making informed decisions where there are uncertainties. Okay, from the techniques you adopt, for example, like a bow tie, you can actually take a decision based on whatever is being represented to depict the true nature of the uncertainties that you have within the enterprise. Then it helps us to adequately provide information about the risk, because one of the major challenges is the true representation of the state of things within the organization, especially when it comes to uncertainties and, of course, opportunities. Okay, and the part of the process, okay, and part of the process for managing risk. So these three key areas are the boundaries that the 31,010 will help us largely. So let's look at adoption now. Adopting the RAT. Of course, it provides understanding of, helps us with understanding of the uncertainties and is what? Implications for decision and actions to be taken. Okay, that's a very good one, because most times the problem is that enterprises really don't understand what the risks are and what the impact to be of the consequences and how to carry out further assessment on them. And of course, most importantly, the action to be undertaken to ensure that we can mitigate the risk when it crystallizes. I mean, an evidence is what we experienced during COVID, where up till now, most organizations can still not get back to their feet as a result of what happened, because it was never in their risk register, neither was it even part of the strategy to come up with a mitigation action in place. Then we also have, it assists us to determine where more understanding is required. Okay, when you use the RAT techniques, you'll be able to have more understanding where you need more action and what risk exists and if there are specific one. Okay, depending on how it is being presented and what's represented. And one of the key processes in the risk management process, of course, we know it is reporting and communication of risk. Okay, so it's one of the areas that we need to look at. So the RAT will assist us largely around that. And of course, it assists us within the risk management process. I just mentioned that now, while leading to actions and for further treatment of the risk, or sorry, that should be or opportunity. Okay, not of opportunity. Decision-making in a range of options. Most importantly, when you present some of these things using the right and appropriate technique, decisions in a range of opportunities where comparison is required will be optimized. Okay, so you also have that as an advantage, reasons for adoption. The practical benefits. So what do we stand to gain as an enterprise? What do we stand to gain? Most importantly, supports our decision-making in a well-informed structural manner, because of the techniques adopted have been so depicted for people, decision makers to see. Okay, structural manner assists in making plans for the necessary actions we need to commit to it. And it helps us to clear the air on assumptions, risk assumptions, because most times some of these things comes in an abstract form. So it clears the air for us towards achieving an organizational objective. Largely, it is because of the organizational objectives that we're doing what we're doing anyway. The focal point is to make sure the organization meets its objectives. So those things, risk assumptions that will make us not to achieve our organizational objectives, are the things we'll be able to clear the air properly. And of course, ability to recognize and exploit opportunities. Again, it depends on the attributes and the characteristics of the various risk assessment techniques that will be deployed that will assist us around that. Identify effective and efficient treatment options. Yes, For example, the business impact analysis is a very good risk assessment technique that we use largely when we are building an organizational resilience around business continuity management systems according to ISO 22301. And of course, ability to compare multiple options. You have options on systems, technologies, approaches where there are various risks. Because, for example, if you have a bow-tie analysis, it will assist us to really pick the options that will be more appropriate for us to be able to mitigate the risk. All right, so we now look, after looking at the adoption of the benefits, so how do we implement? How do we implement? Okay. The first thing we need to do is to plan the assessments properly. I've actually brought this under the planning the assessment. And under planning the assessment that you tend to do, why are you doing it? What is the boundary? What's the scope? Which areas do you really intend to cover? That question must be answered. Because largely it will help us with the kind of techniques that will be adopted. I'm going to show us a reference table on how the characteristics of each areas that we need to look at. Then you need to understand the context in which it is being required. Okay, what factors predicate the reason why we should have a risk assessment? Is it because we are addressing risk and opportunity, because we're doing information security, or we're doing IT service management, or we're doing quality management system? Or we just want to ensure that we set a strategic objectives and we're trying to look at what are the things that will make us not achieve those objectives as a brand, either from a public or a private sector perspective. Then most importantly, stakeholder engagement is highly required. It's one of the key principles of ISO 31000, stakeholders engagement. You need to involve all parties involved, both internal stakeholders and of course, external stakeholders. Then you set your objectives. The objectives for having the risk assessment done must be adequately set. Then factor in social, organizational, and human concern is also one of the key principles guides around the risk management according to ISO 31000. And of course, criteria to take into action, okay, when making decisions. What are the things we want to factor? What are the criteria? What are the attributes we need to look at? Is it around cost? Is it around downtime? Is it around efficiency? Or is it around measurement of possible efficiency indices that you've so designed for the system? So you have that done when you are trying to implement the risk assessment techniques under the plan, the assessments. 2, the next thing we do is to manage information and seek required model. Which model do you intend to use? And largely, you have relevant information should be obtained. Highly important that you make sure all relevant, because one of the other key principles of risk management according to ISO 31000 2019 is what? Working with what? Reliable evidence, and of course, relevant information should, I would want to even say must be obtained. Then you collect your data when you know the areas you want to collect, the required relevant information. Then you analyze them. Of course, analysis is the second activities after identification, risk identification, when you're talking about risk assessment. Then you develop and apply the model depending on the techniques. Then use appropriate softwares. An Excel sheet could go for some, and for some, depending on the kind of assessment you are doing. For example, if you are doing an assessment that requires a lot of numerical representation, then you should be looking for an appropriate software around quantitative risk management process. Then you apply the software for further analysis as expected. Okay. Any question at this point before I continue? Any question, any concern? All right, okay, let me check. Okay, all right. I can see somebody saying no here. All right, so sorry for that. We have applying risk assessment techniques, okay? Each of the RAT has appropriate techniques to be applied. Okay, each of the RAT has appropriate techniques to be applied. So the first thing we need to do when we are looking forward to applying the techniques is to develop an understanding of risk as an input of decisions where it is necessary. We need to have a very deep understanding of the risk issues. Okay, then where there is uncertainty, that is when we need to do that. Of course, if there is no uncertainty, most definitely there will be no thing to discuss or develop understanding. Okay, someone is asking a question. The guidelines for selecting analysis seems to be generic across. Yes, that's correct. Am I missing any specific interest 1000? No, you are not. Actually, let me try and get the name. Okay, I'll respond to your questions one after the other. Let's just continue. We have someone requesting for 31,000 and 27,000 of 5 possible. Please, okay. Elucidate, okay, I've seen that. Am I missing anything? No, you are not missing anything, but I'll explain. Let's assume we don't have any risk assessment model. How do we start to check? You need to first of all understand the risk. That's Mr. Patel. You need to first of all understand the risk for you to be able to know the assessment model to adopt, okay? And for the person that requested for the guidelines of selecting analysis seems to be generic across all. Yes, they are different because when you look at the COSO framework, it's also another very good risk assessment, generally used for risk management. But in its own assessment side, it has areas that is largely more around strategy and operational risk issues. Okay, I'll touch more on that much later. Then someone is asking 31,000 and 27,005. 27,005 is largely a more specific risk assessment requirements that we need to meet around information security. Okay, but 31,000 is more generic because you will only be using 27,001 ideally, 27,005, sorry, ideally for an environment that has information security. But if that environment also has operational risk concerns, they have credit risk concerns, they have strategy risk concerns, or they have an enterprise-wide concern, most definitely you can't use 27,005 solely for such an enterprise. I hope it's clear. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. I think I can continue now. All right, so the next thing you do, risk assessment is part of IT governance. Yes, yes. In fact, when you look at the corporate governance, it's actually centered around governance, risk, and compliance. If you remove the R, there's no governance in the organization. The same thing goes with IT. So what are those things that will make you not achieve your goal as an IT governance person? Okay, so those are the things you now focus on. I hope it's clear. Thank you. Any guidelines to start analysis, which area needs to have potential risk, depending on the risk and depending on the nature of the enterprise and the scope, we'll be able to determine the potential techniques to use for both analysis and otherwise. Okay. All right. Okay, I would continue. So you identify the risk. You identify the risk, determine the sources, causes, and drivers of risk and opportunity. Very, very important. These are the things that will assist you to know the appropriate techniques to be used. Then the ability to investigate if there are existing controls to mitigate the risk is also something we look to adequately look into. Then, of course, understanding the consequences and likelihood. What exactly, by the time you look at the objective of the reason why you're doing your risk assessment, most definitely you have a very good understanding of the consequence and the likelihood. Then, analyze interactions and dependencies. Very, very important. Analyze your interactions, dependencies. Then you determine your measures. How do you intend to measure the risk? Okay. And of course, review your analysis, apply your results for decision-making, and most importantly, you need to record, communicate, and report the outcomes to all your necessary stakeholders. All right, I will continue. I think there's a question here. It's very important before planning phase in chemical. Absolutely, it's very important before design phase in chemical industry. Yes. In fact, if I need to touch on that, you shouldn't even go into bringing any chemical that you don't know the reactive consequence of them causing problem within your enterprise. For example, you want to work with acid and you've decided to go and bring it. In what as simple as the container that you are going to use to bring in the acid into your enterprise. You need to know the material, you need to know the procedure that you use in handling. Pretty much you might be bringing in health and safety concerns in there also, and that's one of the things, because health and safety will help us with the required controls that we need to work on. To help us with the required control that we need to work on. Yes. All right, someone is also asking, how can risk be measured? I will explain that further when I get to the end of the class. Yes, you have fault, medium, and high grade, yes, for controls in the software, absolutely. All right, so that's a technique. The FMEA is also one of the techniques that we use for risk assessment. So let's now look at selecting the risk assessment techniques. In selecting the techniques to be used, we must consider how they will be applied. How do you intend to apply them? How they should be tailored to the context and of course use, and how to provide information on the type and form needed by all the necessary stakeholders. So these are things, you can see me underlining each of these key points that we need to look at in selecting our risk assessment techniques. All right, so in selecting factors, you need to consider when you are selecting the purpose of the assessment. I said it earlier. You need to know the purpose of the assessment. Then what are the needs of your stakeholders? Very important. In what scenario are you actually carrying out the risk assessment and your operating environment? These are concerns that we really need to look into. Then what time is available? What time is available for us to get that done? Then, of course, information that is made available during the risk assessment process. You must use reliable and relevant questions. Reliable and relevant questions. And the reason is because it's also one of the key principles of risk management process according to ISO 31000. Working with reliable information. Then the complexity of the situation at hand. Okay, because application of risk assessment can actually be done at lots of areas. Okay, then the skills and knowledge of the people handling the risk assessment. Because you need to have skilled manpower, people that really know what they need to do in helping you assess the risk, because the outcome of it is going to support decision-making by top management of the organization. So you don't want them to take or make information that is not relevant or making ill-informed decisions to stakeholders, either board of directors of the organization or stakeholders, or even authorities in government, as the case may be. So having talked about the various concerns, let's now look at the characteristics for selecting these risk assessments. Okay, and we'll be looking at that around application, what characteristics, how do we apply, how the techniques is used in risk assessment. Of course, like I said, I referenced the 31010. And what are the details? You need to look at, elicit the views, identify, analyze the cause. Where do you want to really need to apply the risk assessment? Analyze if there are existing controls. Then when you're talking about the scope, okay, applies to, is it at organization level, department level, or project level? At times we do project risk management. So that means it's at the scope of the project alone. At times we do strategic risk assessment. Is at the nature of course, the organization, their strategy. Are they achievable? Are these objectives that set for the organization, is this smart enough? Okay, so what are the risk issues, that uncertainties or opportunities that are therein for us to achieve them? Then the details, you look at the organization, you look at the project, equipment and process. Then you look at also the time. Is it for a short time or a long time? So these are some of the characteristics that you need to look out for you to know the appropriate risk assessment techniques. Then starting information that you require, is it high, is it medium, is it low? During the first, where you look at the context of the organization, which is key. Most times people start risk assessment from risk identification. Yes, you can say that, but most importantly, like what we've seen, you are expected to look at what? Within the context, look at the context of the organization. Why do they intend to go for a risk assessment? Then you also look at another characteristics around specialized expertise, the level that is required. For example, if you need to do FMEA, like somebody rightly mentioned, in the chemical industry, most definitely you need somebody that is skilled around that area to help you with such kind of technique. Okay. Then we also have the decision level, okay, which is also another characteristics. Most times you look at that from the strategic, tactical, operational side. Then the starting information will mention that. Then if there's going to be an effort to apply time costs, okay, you also determine that. A lot of some of these characteristics, we need to make sure we build them into what we are doing, especially at the planning of the assessment phase of the risk assessments. All right, so looking at the characteristics, let's now look at the techniques for the risk assessment and their indicative characteristics. For example, you have a technique called bolter analysis. You can see we have a table in the annex of the document that is already telling us the description. Okay, I'm going to touch more on around the ones that are common, the risk register, brainstorming, business impact analysis, and bolter, but I'll start with bolter. 2/3 of the scope, most times, that's the characteristics they've given us. Time zone, around short, medium time, as well, using most times for presentation. Information we need, starting information, model, data need is low, but low, moderate, of course, anybody can do a bolter. I mean, we all know what a bolter is. And of course, the need for quantitative semi-analysis also is there, and efforts to apply it is low. You really don't need much expertise to do that, as long as you can draw and represent what is meant to do. Of course, is a diagrammatic way of describing the pathway where you can put the source of the risk, the outcomes, and of course, looking at the controls you have. Largely, where you want to use is, you use it more in representing and reporting the risk to top management or stakeholders, because some of these things can actually come as abstract to them. So you need to look out for how you represent. So we use this mostly. I've used this to represent the outcome of risk to a larger audience of top management, where they can see the source, they can see the outcome, and they can see the necessary controls. We have B.1.2, which is the brainstorming, okay, where you have workshops to encourage imaginative thinking. We use this largely when we're doing risk identification. Even when we're looking at the context of the organization, you need to involve all relevant stakeholders, which is a key principles in ISO 31010. It gives you an illicit view, that's the application, and any scope, you can use it anywhere. Timing is also any, decision level is any, low, moderate, and of course, effort to apply is just for you to make sure people conform to the rules of the brainstorming sessions, and of course, they don't go out of it. Pretty much, I love this because of the advantage of imaginative thinking, and it makes everybody to work together as a team. Another very good techniques, which we are going to look at, is the business impact analysis. Every business is impacted by one risk or opportunity or the other. So it's something that is very, very much required in most, especially when you're doing a business continuity plan or you're doing a BCMS project, as the case may be, or even when you have a PCI-DSS around the corner that you are working with. So the BIA process analyzes the consequences. It speaks more on the consequences. What if that happens? What will be the consequences and what will be the impact of a disruptive incidences? And of course, you now need to start. It helps us to do another thing, which is what? Determine the recovery priorities. So we use it to set BCP strategies and solutions, okay, around our BCMS. It's one of the major tasks when we are, of course, I'm sure some of us know this, when we are doing our BCMS project. Application analyzes for us the consequences and controls. And I will also add the impacts. I will want to add that. I mean, if I have the opportunity, I'll send that addition down to the ISO technical committee that actually worked on this document. I want to add to analyze the consequence, analyze the existing controls, and of course the impacts. Okay, the impact, the scope is 1, and of course time, short and medium. Decision level is 2 on the scale, and the starting information need is medium. Okay, and of course expertise is low because it's something we can do almost immediately after a brainstorming session. So we don't need much skill. As long as you know the required attributes that you need to put down that you can get from your risk assessment, you just bring them into your business impact analysis. Effort to apply is medium. You don't need much effort to get that done. I will want to touch on risk register also. Is something we commonly use. It's actually subclause B10.2. A means of recording. We just use it for recording information. A lot of people have risk registers and they call it risk assessment documents. You know, I mean, we keep having that. I try to, most times when I get into an enterprise, I try to correct them that you have a risk register, not a risk assessment. So it's largely used for recording and reporting risk. And of course, when you want to monitor and review risk, what is the status of the risk? Who is doing what, and what do we need to do around? Then from there, you can now go into further assessment analysis as the case may be. Any scope, time, horizon is any decision, any. Of course, the starting information that is required is low or medium, depending on the circumstance in which you are actually carrying out. Of course, you need low and moderate knowledge to actually record risk, as long as required columns or attributes of the risk can be penned down. And of course, the efforts to apply is also medium. All right, let me quickly take a question. How can we select the risk analysis in agricultural projects in Bangladesh? I would definitely need to, okay. I can't speak specific about that, but there's agricultural sector risk management techniques similar to COSO. Okay, they must have, this ASAR must have been drawn from referencing COSO to have their own because of the specific nature of the agricultural project. Connect with me if you have any questions. Okay, I will connect with you once we finish, Dr. Nika, so that we can discuss on that also later. Thank you. All right, so application, we also need to look at how this RAT is being, how it affects largely the entire 31,000 risk management process. You can see that when you're looking at the scope, context, and criteria, you use B1. We're going to see each of these numbers and how we get to use them. This is the entire risk management process according to 31,010. You can see risk assessment itself. You can see B1, B2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 for risk assessment alone. Okay, treatment just 4 and 8. And of course, recording and reporting use B10. And of course, you can use any other means or techniques for your consultation and monitoring as the case may be. So they've even given us a lead on the appropriate techniques that we can use. So let's now look at each of them. B1 is actually largely talking about techniques for eliciting the views, brainstorming, Delphi technique, interviews, and survey. Most times when you're looking at the scope, the context, that's what we do. We have interview to people. Then the risk identification, we use B2 and B3, where we can use checklists, or we can use the fourth medium, that's FMEA or FMEA. We can also use the ASOP, and we can also use the scenario analysis, depending on the nature of the project. Similarly, for determining the causes, we can also use B3, which is talking about root cause analysis, which is, we largely use that too when you're even trying to identify the causes of why there are certain non-conformities, as the case may be in an existing management system project. Similarly, we have B4, where we'll be looking at techniques for analyzing the controls. You can use a bow tie analysis for that as well. You can use a bow tie analysis for that. Then techniques for understanding the consequences and the likelihood. Okay, then of course, we can use cross-impact analysis for B6, techniques for analyzing dependencies and interaction. Then of course, B7, as the case may be, we've seen how we can use it. The same thing goes with B8 for evaluation. When you're evaluating the risk, we use the risk indices. As somebody is asking me, how do we measure? For example, if you want to evaluate the threats that your assets that are exposed to the cyber world is the threat that your asset is faced with. You use a SIM solution, for example. The SIM solution will give you possible threats, indices, numbers. So you can use those numbers as you can use them as indicators to help you measure the ones you've done in last quarter and the ones you are doing this quarter. So you can use that to evaluate your threat evaluation, okay? Based on what I just explained around the technique for evaluating the significance of the risk. So if the more you keep having, then you know that you have a larger possibility for significance of risk within for those assets that are faced in the cyberspace. And techniques for selecting them, also B9, is also, we can use the game theory or the decision tree analysis, or you can also use what we call the common one, we call it the cost-benefit analysis. Then, of course, techniques for recording, B10, we largely use consequence likelihood metrics, or we use, the simple one, the risk register. That's what we use for recording and reporting the risk. So based on that, we have this applicability of each of these techniques. Okay, what are the applicability? Someone can actually ask that question. Is it applicable? For example, if we want both our analysis, under risk identification, it is applicable. Consequence analysis, consequences, it is strongly applicable. Likelihood, it is applicable. Level of risk, it is applicable. Risk evaluation is applicable. Of course, we are talking of risk assessment process. The same thing goes with the brainstorming. For risk identification, largely, strongly applicable, we can use, we should use brainstorming. Okay? And you can see, you can't use brainstorming for what? Level of risk. Under risk analysis, it is not applicable. Neither will it be applicable for your risk evaluation. Okay? All right, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that's been the brief I could give for now because of time. So I'm open for questions. Please share this deck after showing. Yes, I will do that. Mr. Daniel, I will do that. Okay. Love these summaries of assessment text. Oh, thank you, Mr. Sriram. Sorry for murdering your name. So for contacts, we can, that's my mobile phone number, also my WhatsApp, and of course my email, and of course the organization where I work, that's a website. So you can avail yourself. So thank you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for your time. Oh, thank you. Excellent concept and delivery. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. All right. No, one question I have an education. Okay, let's talk. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Next session. Thank you. All right. Good overview. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. So thanks for the wonderful presentation. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you. All right. Thank you. So you can contact me anytime. My email is there for you to see. Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I'll share the PPT. Right. I'll share it. I'll do that. All right. Thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to another opportunity to be among you guys. Thank you so much for having me. So I'll hand over to the host to do the needful. Pascal Ikechukwu, thank you. That's my brother from Nigeria. Really appreciate this. Thank you. You can communicate. Thank you so much.